the Canvas website, right? And so you should have a link to your course in Canvas, and it has a lot of different information, including another copy of the syllabus, which you just got, but also some homework. And the thing that we are doing differently this particular quarter is that we no longer are using the mastering homework. And so that mastering homework is replaced by online quizzes that are due every week on Sunday. And so the first group of those online quizzes can be found under or in Canvas directly under assignments or within each week. And so if you go to assignments, for example, you have your different quizzes. And you'll notice that they actually are not openable until the week that we are going to be going over that information. So this one is available, should be available. It says September 24th. I don't know why it's not there. Published. They should all be published. Sorry, I'm not sure why this is. Anyway, so you should be able to go in there and check out that quiz. And I will need to check on this because for some reason they're 10 points instead of, I think these are not the right ones. Sorry. Geez. I should go into student view to see what you guys see. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so we have, those are quizzes from a different quarter. So if we go back to here, you can see that this is the practice quiz, and that is the one that is due on Sunday. And then we have the lymphatic system and the immunology quiz, and that is due 2 weeks. And that one is worth 20 points. And so what I'm going to do, or what I'm going to try to do, is record the lectures and then put them on the Canvas site so that you can review that information. I would recommend trying to come to class because there's no better way to get the information than coming to class. But if you do happen to miss a class, then you can watch the video as it is recorded. So if you look at your syllabus, you'll notice that we are no longer using the anatomy and physiology text that some of you have, although it is still useful. So it is actually a better textbook than the online textbook, but it is kind of spendy. And so what we decided to do is go to open educational resources so that you can save a little bit of money and in the process have a pretty good textbook, okay? But I would keep those ones that you have. The problem with the textbook that we currently are using is that it is currently not available for printing out. And so you'll notice here that on your syllabus, there is a link to the textbook. And I'll put one in the Canvas website too, a link to the direct textbook. So I would, and we have extra copies of those textbooks that we used in the previous quarters in lab to look at and to use in lab. But I would, when you're actually taking the quizzes, I would reference this book, although they should be similar to what you have in your old textbook. I know that's kind of confusing. Is anybody like totally confused by what I'm saying here? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so if you look at the, there's some listed outcomes for this course and then how to do well on your syllabus. And then everybody should be aware that we meet in here on Monday and Wednesdays, but on Fridays, we're going to be in the lab. And so the lab, for those of you who haven't taken the course previously, is downstairs, and it is in room ST119. And so the lab goes a little bit longer. It's a 2.5-hour lab starting at 10 o'clock. And so you want to try to come to that lab because there's no way to make up the lab once the week is over, because it is on Friday and we have labs going all the time in that classroom. I generally have to take down the lab on Friday so that the person who's coming in can set theirs up for Monday. So there is, however, a way to potentially make up those points. And that is through the extra credit assignment. And even if you come to all of the labs, you can still do the extra credit assignment. And so this is, for those of you who've taken class previously with me, this is in lieu of the Physio X, that extra credit that you used to be able to do. And so this is a mini research paper. So you want to look at the topics, and the topics are listed on the very back of your syllabus. And the mini research paper has to have something to do with these topics, okay? So, for example, we really aren't covering much of the skeletal system or the muscular system. We already talked a little bit about we talked extensively about the nervous system and the endocrine system. So this is specifically about these. And here is the what I'm looking for. And this is not due until the very end or near the end of the quarter. So that is a lot of time that you can have to think about what it is that you would like to do a little bit extra research on. And so I have included in Canvas a sample research paper. So I wrote just up a really quick sample research paper. And because we're covering the digestive system, I wanted to talk a little bit about the part of the nervous system that innervates your gut. And that is referred to sometimes as the second brain. And 10 years ago, we were just starting to learn about this, and you might have seen it in the news. But now this idea of the second brain in your digestive tract is like everywhere. So this whole idea that digestive health influences all kinds of other aspects of your well-being. So we kind of know that digestive health influences our immune system, because sometimes we get immune system disorders that attack the digestive system. So like Crohn's or celiac disease. But also the gut brain also influences things like mood. And so sometimes depression can be related to digestive health. And then obviously we know that there's all kinds of microorganisms that now live in the digestive tract and are super important. And so I just wrote up a little example of a research paper, so you can take a look at that. And then I included my citations in what is referred to as APA format. And so you'll notice that the author comes, the last name comes first, and then I have the date in which it was published. And then that is also referenced in the paper, okay? So if you have any questions about how to do this, or if you want to make sure that a topic is appropriate to do, just let me know, okay? So that is in kind of to replace some of the physiological experiments that we did online previously. Okay. So if you look at the grading scheme, which is on page 2 of your syllabus, we have 2 major exams in here. So the midterm and the final exam. Those are closed books and closed notes, and they're done on paper in the classroom. And then we have the in-class quizzes. So generally what happens is that we have 2 lecture periods, and then we take a quiz over the information presented in those 2 lecture periods. And then we go on to the next couple of lectures, and then we take another quiz. And so those are going to be worth 15 points. And the first lecture quiz is going to be next Monday. So next Monday, when you come in, you're going to take just a little quiz over the information. And this quiz is a way to prepare yourself for doing well on the midterm and the final exams. And so it's just a way to know how I test, like how you should be studying for the tests, and then just a good way to keep up on your studying. The thing about those quizzes is I give you 1 or 2 extra quizzes, and then you get to drop your lowest quiz score. So if you miss a quiz and get a 0, it's not the end of the world, because that 0 will be dropped. But if you miss quizzes on a regular basis, then it will become a problem. Also, if you're going to miss a quiz, you want to let me know ahead of time so I can make arrangements. Specifically, if I'm like going to hand back the quiz, once I've handed it back, there's no way that you can take the quiz. So just shoot me an email and let me know if you're going to be gone on that particular day, and then we can reschedule when the quiz is going to be. Okay, if we look at the Canvas quizzes, those are online, due every Sunday at midnight. And then we have the lab notebook. So the lab notebook is going to be something that you are going to turn into me. And I recommend using a 3-ring binder simply because it's easiest to put your handouts and everything into a 3-ring binder. I know traditionally lab notebooks are actually the bound composition notebooks because you can't take papers out or add papers in without it becoming obvious, right? Because you can't rip or add papers to it, rip papers out without observing that. So, but for this lab, it's probably best for your studying that you have all the lab materials together rather than having extra pieces of paper just floating around. So I would get a separate 3-ring, small, not huge, small 3-ring binder to put your lab materials in, and make sure that you have some paper when you come to lab in case you need to write and draw stuff on that for that particular lab. So you turn in your lab notebook approximately the 3rd week of lab, and then at the very end, and I grade that, and that's how you get credit for coming to lab and doing the work. Then we're going to have a lab practical. So for this quarter, the lab practical is going to be at the very end. So we're just going to have one lab practical. And so we'll talk more about what's going to be on the lab practical. But for this particular term, it's going to be like models with labels so that you can identify the different parts of the systems that we're going to be studying. And it will also be, we're doing one big dissection, which is the fetal pig dissection. So it'll be like a dissected fetal pig, and you need to be able to identify all the parts of the fetal pig. And then also some histology, so some slides of tissues. So you're going to need to be able to identify those as well. So you notice that the midterm and the final exams are listed on this tentative syllabus. No lab, that is the week of Thanksgiving. So obviously we'll not be here for Friday's lab. And then the lab practical is the very last week of lab. So are there any questions about the syllabus? No, in the class? Jenna, do you have any? No? No. Okay. No questions. Okay, so for those who don't know me, my name is Michelle, and you can just call me Michelle Miller, but I just go by Michelle. And I have been teaching here for quite a while. I think this is like my 24th year of teaching. Oh, that's a long time. So I'm actually kind of used to more low-tech type ways of teaching. So I like to write my lecture notes out. And it's actually shown that if you actually physically write your notes out rather than just looking at a PowerPoint slide and studying PowerPoint slides, that it's actually better to get it into your brain. And so I cannot learn from PowerPoint, so I do not use PowerPoint slides. I have added a section in here which is going to have my, Word document of my lecture. And so this might be something that you might want to look at because it's going to have the images, specifically the images that I'm going to show you and that you should study for. These images are from the online textbook, but there's very similar images in the Pearson textbook as well. So you can actually print these images out if you wanted to include them in your notes. So I am kind of a traditional zoologist. So I studied all kinds of animals. So including, you know, like reptiles and fish and vertebrates and invertebrates. And so my emphasis in my studies was not specifically human, but I've kind of expanded on that. This was administrators kind of assigned me to teach this class about 12 years ago. And so I've taken it and hopefully made it a good class. Okay. So there's another person that also teaches in the department, and her name is Kristen Oya, O-J-A, Oya. And she is more of a traditionally trained human biology person. And we have the same topics and the same outcomes, but our methods of teaching might just be a little bit different. I also teach yoga, and I teach a fitness class called Nia, which is a barefoot kind of martial arts dancey class. And those can be taken for credit too, or for non-credit. So if you're interested, you are in my yoga class. Yep. That's exciting. You've taken it before, haven't you? Oh, I thought you've been in yoga before. Your whole team, what team?
Volleyball.
Volleyball, oh yes, yeah, that's good.
If I had the space in my schedule, I would heavily take it.
Yeah.
I am not flexible at all.
Yeah. I like to teach it because it kind of gives you a whole sense of your body and your organs and your muscles and your bones as you're actually using them. So it's kind of a cool thing to do when you're studying anatomy and physiology, to also take a yoga class or a Nia class. Yeah. Okay. So today we're going to talk about the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system is actually really important, and it is actually integrated with our circulatory system. So do you remember where in the circulatory system do you have the exchange between the tissues and the blood vessels? Where is there actually exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide and nutrients and waste in the circulatory system? The plasma membrane of what? What kind of vessel? What? You said it. Capillaries. Okay. So we have fluid lost from capillaries. And this is picked up, by the lymphatic system. So blood comes into the capillaries under high pressure. And can everybody see that? Or do you want me to turn the other lights off? Is everybody okay with that? Let's see if I can get this to... Okay. So blood comes in under high pressure into your capillaries, and your capillaries are actually very leaky. And so fluid leaves the capillaries, and that is a good thing because the fluid contains nutrients like glucose, like amino acids, like proteins, and it also contains oxygen, and water. So it goes out into and it bathes the individual cells in your tissues, and then the cells can take up those nutrients and use them to produce energy. But the problem is that the capillaries sometimes, well, they lose too much fluid, and not all of the fluid can be taken back up by the capillaries. Some of it is, some of the water is taken back up and the waste products, but a lot of it is left in what is referred to as the interstitial fluid. So if we look at a diagram of this is the blood vessel that is carrying blood to the tissue. So this is my small artery, which is called an arteriole, and then fluid is lost from the capillaries. And you'll notice that the lymphatic system is labeled in green. So it's not really green, right? Just like your veins are not actually blue. They're actually a different color of red. But that's just how they kind of, in all the textbooks, if you're looking at something that is green, that is the lymphatic system, okay? So you'll notice that it consists of these blind-ended vessels. And it used to be thought that these were more like straws, like they were able to just suck the water out of the tissues. But we now know that they actually have valves on them that will open up when the pressure in the tissue gets to be too high. So we'll say that these lymphatic vessels are blind-ended vessels. Oops, I gotta work on the ability to talk and write at the same time after summer.
My handwriting is terrible.
Blind-ended vessels. Okay. They have flaps. That open up and let fluid in. These flaps move in one direction, so they don't go inward, they actually come outward. So the pressure develops, we get fluid in the tissues, and those flaps will open and fluid will just move into the lymphatic capillaries. So the thing about these lymphatic capillaries is that they have no pump. So it's not like the circulatory system. It's not like the blood that has the heart that is pumping it. So that the fluid is not pumped through the lymphatic system. So we have to have some other mechanism of getting it to move, okay? So it's associated, just like our veins, with skeletal muscle. So moving actually helps your lymphatic system to pick up fluid and get it to where it moves up towards the heart. Okay? They also have valves. They actually have more valves than the veins that prevent backflow. So this prevents fluid from coming back out of the capillaries. Once they get in there, they get squeezed by skeletal muscle or the movement of the body. They even say breathing and the movement of your abdominal muscles actually helps to move your lymphatic fluid too. So once they get to a certain point, it can't flow back because the valves prevent it from flowing back. And so the lymph moves from, or always moves towards the heart. So lymph always moves towards the heart. Now, the interesting thing about our lymphatic vessels is that they can be variable from one individual to the next. So there's lots of variation. There's actually more variation than we see in the veins. We do see that there's some variation between individuals in the structure and the way that the veins come in, but the lymphatic system seems to be more variable than that. But the interesting thing is that it is asymmetric. So the vessels are not the same on the right or left. Okay, so the vessels are asymmetric, which means without symmetry. So the right side is smaller than the left, and it picks up fluid from your right arm and the right side of your head, kind of the chest. It's kind of a, if you saw a drawing, I'll show you a drawing of it. It's the right side of the head, the arm, and the chest, okay? So this would be upper right extremity and the right side of the head. Okay. The left side is much larger. So it includes the upper left extremity, so I'll just put a, and left side of the head, but it also includes all of the lower body. So lymph from your right and left legs goes up and it comes into the left side of the lymphatic fluid. And this fluid gets put back into circulation in the veins. So the venous circulation up near the neck, okay? So they empty. So the vessels empty. We'll put vessels. Empty. Near neck region. And they enter into the venous circulation. So they're not put back into arteries, they're put back into your veins that are going to go then back to the heart to be pumped out to the lungs to pick up oxygen and then back out to the body. So we can see an image of this in our book. Okay. So this shows the lymphatic vessels up near the neck, and they're going to drain back into these big veins, the jugular veins, like right there. And then we can see that there are some veins that are coming from the lower legs. It's interesting that they say that this is a structure here, like a sac, that picks up the lymphatic fluid, and the lymphatic fluid moves through there. That sac is actually only present in about 50% of people. And so some people have it, some people don't. And so the pathway that these vessels take is slightly different depending upon the individual. So they start out as really small capillaries, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's just like the venous system, where you start out with a small vessel, and then the small vessels come together until they get into big vessels, which then no longer pick up fluid, but then are just transporting or conducting the fluid back to the circulatory system. So I think there's another diagram here. Let me see if I can find it, that shows the right and the left sides. Yeah, right here. Okay. So this shows, this is the right side, the lymphatic drainage for the right side of the body. And this is the lymphatic drainage for the left side of the body. And this is that big duct that is present in some people, but not in others. Okay. So what is edema? Buildup of fluid. So this causes swelling. So if you've worked in the medical profession, you might know that there's a difference between swelling that is that when you touch it and you press into it, it causes or it leaves an indentation. Does anybody know what that's called? Where you press into a person's swollen foot, or for example, and it leaves an indentation. Pitted, right? So this lymphedema is actually non-pitting edema or non-pitted edema. So if a person has a problem with swelling due to excess lymphatic fluid, it's when you press down on it, it does not leave an indentation. So the pitted edema is actually due to things like your liver not working properly or your kidneys not working properly. But if you have a problem in a blockage of the lymphatic system, it is non-pitted. Okay? So this can be due to or can be caused by surgery. Because oftentimes people go in, right, into surgery, and they have to have, say, for example, if you have to have a breast removed, a mastectomy, then they also take some of the lymphatic vessels with it, right? And so then this could lead to a problem with draining lymphatic fluid in the region where the surgery was. Okay. You can also have parasitic infection, which is an interesting. Right? So there is a group of parasites that infect the lymphatic system, and they live there as adults. And this disease is sometimes referred to as elephantiasis. caused by a round worm. So this is a parasite that is actually transmitted via the bite of a mosquito. So what happens is that the mosquito bites you, the larval form of the parasite gets into your circulatory system, and then it goes to your lymphatic system where it develops into an adult. And it produces larvae that then migrate to the surface of your skin, so that when you are bitten by a mosquito, that can pick up the larvae and then transmit it to another person. And so elephantiasis, we obviously don't have it in this country. It's more of a tropical disease, but it is something that people get. Luckily, we can treat it with an insecticide or pesticide, actually, a helminthiside, a nematicide, that kills the roundworms before any damage is done. But in some countries, you can see that there can be extreme swelling because of the parasitic worms that are living in the lymphatic system. So this is an example of a edema that is caused by the inability of the lymphatic system to drain properly. And so some people that have this can benefit from what is referred to as a lymphatic massage. So you can actually go in and get a specific massage therapist who has been trained to try to move the lymph. And so their whole idea is not to massage the muscles necessarily. I guess they would massage the muscles that are associated with those lymphatic vessels, but to massage the tissue to help to move the lymph out of the swollen vessel. And this can also be treated with diuretics. So if you can get rid of excess fluid in the body, if you have too much fluid, then the lymphatic can get clogged up, right? And it can have too much lymph and it can't transport it, and then you can get swelling. So you could have a person take drugs to get rid of fluid. So you would urinate those fluids out.
That stuff doesn't contain other like harmful, like when it does go into your veins and stuff. For people in that instance, is it not harmful for that fluid to go into the rest of your body?
This fluid?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess elephantitis is a bit of an extreme, but like how you were saying, you can massage it out.
Right. So you wouldn't do that for elephantiasis.
Sure.
And so in this particular instance, after the lymphatic vessels have become so damaged, then there's no cure for that. But you would get treatment before that. So with this one, I don't think that so you're worried about blood pressure.
Well, yeah, that, or like for, people are just now starting to get a case of it. Wouldn't all of that stuff that's built up have a bunch of toxins that once is released back into your body, like?
There shouldn't be toxins. So what is in the lymphatic fluid is water, but it's also proteins that are lost from your capillaries. So those proteins can't get back into the capillaries, and so they're picked up by the lymphatic system. So there's good stuff that are in the lymphatic system, but we're going to talk about the immune function of the lymphatic system. So there wouldn't be toxins building up in that lymphatic fluid. What there might be is an infection. So the lymphatic system can actually transport microorganisms, and we're going to talk about this next, but it goes through the lymph nodes where it is the microorganisms are detected and the immune system destroys them.
Yeah.
So probably, I don't think that there wouldn't be toxins in that fluid, but it could be that you have an infection that is causing, generally infections, I'm not sure if infections cause that extent of swelling. But also, I guess if you were thinking about putting all of that fluid back into the circulatory system, then that would increase blood pressure. So that might be a problem with doing that. When I think about lymphatic massage, I don't think about extreme cases. It's usually milder cases of edema. Yeah.
Well, I was just trying to picture of it all going back into your body and how your body would kind of react to that.
Right.
It's, so much buildup, then all of a sudden you're releasing all that stuff back straight into your chest area. There's a lot of stuff.
I don't think it can move. I think it can't. It's not like you're just like gonna flush it out by massaging it, that you're going to gently move it towards the circulatory system. Yeah. Okay. There's one more slide I wanted to show. Let's see what. Okay. So the interesting thing about the lymphatic system is that we thought the lymphatic system did not innervate the brain. And so there was this idea that there was this barrier between the lymphatic system, and we're going to talk about how the lymphatic system relates to the immune system. So this happened just a few years ago, and this was the drawing of the lymphatic system in kind of the old textbooks. And so you'll notice that there is no connection to the brain, no connection to the cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. And now with the ability to visualize, so we've developed a better technology of using fluorescent visibility, we've actually discovered that there is a lymphatic system. So it's like, oh, all this time we just didn't see it, right? But it was there. And so we now know that the lymphatic system does innervate, or not innervate, but it does go to the brain. And they believe that it actually might play a really important role in things like Alzheimer's. Because Alzheimer's, in the previous idea was that the immune cells could not get into the brain to take care of debris. Alzheimer's is characterized by a buildup of protein in between the cells. And so maybe it's really important for the immune system to be able to access the brain and to take out all of essentially the junk, the garbage that is left over, and to kind of clean the brain out on a regular basis. And so this finding that our lymphatic system is part of our nervous system, or integrated with our nervous system, holds a lot of promise for the study of diseases in the brain, like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's. So your textbook still has this, okay, but they need to replace it with this, and it probably maybe has been replaced in the newest edition. Okay. So the lymphatic system has in it cells that are called lymphocytes. And these are white blood cells. Or leukocytes. So another name for a white blood cell is a leukocyte. These lymphocytes are very specialized, and we talked about, when we talked about blood in, I think, 231, we talked about all the different types of leukocytes, but lymphocytes are immune cells. So they are specifically responsible for adaptive immunity. And what this means is that they can learn to recognize a foreign invader and then respond appropriately to it. So it is not innate, it's not something that you're born with, but as you're exposed to microorganisms, these are the cells that become specialists in being able to detect and respond to diseases. So for example, you are not born with the ability to respond to the chickenpox virus, the virus that causes chickenpox. But if you are, if you get it, right, or if you get a vaccine, these are the cells that learn to recognize it and can respond if you are re-exposed. Okay? So we have two different types of lymphocytes. We call them the B cells and the T cells. And the reason why they're named B and T is, but those are the areas in which they mature. So B cells mature in the bone marrow. All white blood cells arise in the bone marrow, but not all of them mature. So the B cells mature in the bone marrow. The T cells mature in what we call the thymus gland. So not to be confused with the thyroid, which is an important endocrine gland. The thymus gland is near the thyroid, but it sits on either side. So your thyroid gland is like right in the middle of the neck region, and then your thymus gland, there's two parts of it on each side of the thyroid gland. So T cells would mature within the thymus, and they play different roles. B cells we'll talk about in great detail when we get to the chapter on the immune system, but they're important in the production of antibodies. Whereas you might have heard of T cells in the discussion of AIDS, because it's the helper T cells that the AIDS virus attacks. So the T cells are really important in actually attacking and destroying invading cells. So we'll talk about those differences, but those are the lymphocytes. And when we look at the lymphatic tissue, it is actually composed of loose connective tissue. So lymphatic tissue is composed of loose connective tissue called reticular connective tissue. So if in biology 2 or in the cell biology, biology 112, we talked about the different types of tissues. And remember, connective tissue includes bones, cartilage, fat, but it also includes this loose connective tissue that is kind of like in all of our organs and is underneath our skin, right? And so reticular, what does reticular mean as a word? Does anybody remember? Reticular. It is a network. Right? So we have collagen fibers. So it's a network of collagen fibers. And this provides kind of like the space where the lymphocytes reside, right? So the lymphocytes reside in this reticular connective tissue in this network. There are also macrophages. So this is where lymphocytes and macrophages and another type of white blood cell called a dendritic cell reside. So this is where they live, right? And it is believed that there's a little bit of lymphatic tissue associated with all of your organs, right? So there's a little bit of this lymphatic tissue everywhere. And so the lymphatic system not only helps in draining fluid, but it also has an immune function. Because as this fluid moves through the tissue, moves out of the organs, it goes through these spaces and things are filtered out, like dead cells, like cancerous cells, like virus or cells that have been infected with a virus, or like bacteria. So when bacteria gets into this lymphatic tissue, these are the cells that destroy it, right? So this is the immune function of the lymphatic system. And so we're going to talk now about the organs, the lymphatic organs, and where they are located, the major areas of the lymphatic tissue. So let's actually just kind of skip through this part here. Okay, so let's look at the secondary lymphoid organs. So I'll put primary up here. Primary are the bone marrow and the thymus. Secondary, so that's what that one with a little 0 means, primary. Secondary lymphoid organs. So sometimes when you get sick, the doctor will feel your glands, right? So he'll take and he'll feel your neck region, and he'll say, is this painful? Is it swollen? Is it sore? What they're actually feeling for is not glandular tissue. So that's kind of a misnomer. What they're actually looking for is to see whether or not your lymph nodes are swollen, right? So if the lymph nodes are swollen, this swollen and tender, okay, this means that there is an infection. So lymph, as it is drained back towards the heart, goes through these series of lymph nodes. And the lymph nodes contain lymphatic tissue. So it's reticular connective tissue that has inside of it lymphocytes and macrophages and dendritic cells that are screening the lymph to determine whether or not there's anything present that needs to be destroyed. And so when you're sick, oftentimes the cells will undergo cell division. So they'll actually divide. And that's where they become swollen, right? So swollen means that we have the leukocytes undergoing cell division. Okay. And this tenderness means that they're probably pushing on blood vessels or nerves. As they get bigger, it feels tender, right? So if we look at the structure of the lymph nodes, we see that there's all these little areas where lymph comes in. So lymph is traveling into the lymph nodes like this, okay? And then notice that there's actually only 2 lymphatic vessels that are draining. So there's more lymphatic vessels coming into the lymph node than there is draining. And so what this means is that there's a little period of stagnation, right? So that is a period in which those cells are going to see if there's anything that needs to be destroyed. So these not only exist, these lymph nodes not only exist in your neck, but they also exist in other areas that are close to the surface of the skin. So let me see if I can go back to that image. Okay. So you might, when you're sick, not only have swollen lymph nodes here, but you might, your armpits, if you've ever been really sick, you might notice that there's swollen or stuff swollen in your armpits, and also in your groin area, the inguinal area of your body. So that might also get sore. But notice that there's also lymph nodes that you probably cannot feel by palpating because they're so deep. So if you look at like in the legs, those would be so deep that you cannot feel them. But in places where they come up near the close to the surface of the skin, when they're swollen, you can feel that, right? And so that is just a sign that you are, your immune system is responding to infection. So it's actually a good sign, okay? So sometimes the lymph nodes will swell and there is no infection. So that can actually be a really bad sign. Does anybody know what that is a sign of? If you have swollen lymph nodes and there is no infection. Cancer, right? So lymphoma and there's different types of lymphoma. Lymphoma is actually a really common cancer that occurs in children. So sometimes when children get cancer, you can say, well, is it lymphoma? Because that seems to be a common one that children get. And so this is cancer of the white blood cells. So cancer of leukocytes. And this causes swelling of lymph nodes, but there is no pain. So actually, there must be something that the lymph nodes put out that actually, chemical messenger that actually signals the pain, but there's no pain in this. So that is actually a bad sign. So pain is a sign that it is an infection, and no pain means that these cells are undergoing cell division for no purpose, no reason, not to fight off infection. Okay, so another secondary organ that is involved in the lymphatic system is the spleen. So the spleen is kind of located underneath the rib cage, underneath the diaphragm on the left part of your body. So we'll see it when we do the dissection of the fetal pig. It's flat. It tends to be red because it has red blood cells in it and it stores iron. And we only have one spleen. So like where we have two kidneys, we only have a single spleen. It's kind of up near underneath the stomach area, kind of located right here. So the spleen is sometimes damaged during accidents, like crushed. And then it causes internal bleeding or hemorrhaging. So it used to be that it was actually very common for the spleen to be removed. So you would have a splenectomy, right? And people would take their spleen out because they didn't really understand what it was for. Now they try to leave the spleen in because even though it is bleeding, it actually can repair itself quite well. And in children, you can take out almost all of the spleen, but leave a little piece of it behind during surgery, and it will actually regenerate. And so it has some regenerative properties. So the thing about the spleen is it does not filter lymph. So it does not filter lymph. Lymph nodes do. Okay? It filters blood of old red blood cells and platelets. So platelets are pieces of cells that are important to have in circulation. You want to have a healthy platelet count. Why? If you have no platelets, what could possibly happen to you? Your blood does not clot, right? So platelets are really important in blood clotting, right? So this is blood clotting. So one of the things that the spleen does do is it stores extra platelets. So that if you start to bleed, the spleen can release those extra platelets into circulation to help prevent excessive blood loss. So that's another good reason to have a spleen. It also stores iron. And iron is an important component of what type of molecule, or what molecule we have iron in? What makes our blood red? Found in hemoglobin. Interesting side notes, since I'm a zoologist, when you look at diving mammals like seals that are able to dive really deep and stay underwater for long periods of time, they actually have really large spleens and they can store blood, oxygenated blood in their spleen. And so when they're diving really deep, when they start to run out of oxygen, then the spleen releases this oxygenated blood into the circulation and allows them to stay underwater longer. And I'm not sure if, I've tried to look, but I'm not sure if that's the reason why we can train ourselves to, or one of the reasons why some people can train themselves to stay underwater for long periods of time, like the oyster or the pearl divers that can go underwater and stay under for a longer period of time. You predict that they might have a bigger spleen than normal because of that. So if we look at the image of the spleen, the histology of the spleen, there's actually, this is a diagram showing its location right here on the left side. Notice that there's blood vessels that carry blood to it and then transport the blood back away. The red pulp has the platelets, and then there's also what is referred to as the white pulp, which contains the white blood cells, so that there are macrophages specifically in the spleen that digest old red blood cells and help to break it down so that the components can be used to make new red blood cells. Our red blood cells don't live very long. They live like 120 days max, and so they have to always keep being regenerated. Okay. Okay. We also have tonsils, so this would be a secondary organ as well. And tonsils can be a real bothersome thing. However, they are actually our first line of defense in our immune system, associated with our respiratory and then also the digestive system, right? So if you think about our body, we're actually always bringing in foreign substances as we breathe in, as we take in fluids and food. All that stuff is coming in through the oral cavity and the nasal cavity, which combines into the pharynx. So we have this lymphatic tissue. And so we have what are referred to as the palatine tonsils. This is what you see when you open your throat, right? And you say, ah, you flatten your tongue, right? So this is the a structure, the uvula. I used to think that this was non-functional, but actually it kind of moves up to prevent stuff from going up into your nasal cavity. So when you swallow, instead of getting stuff coming out of your nose, it goes down the right place. So that actually has a function. So this is the tonsils, which are swollen, and they are swollen due to an infection. We also have the pharyngeal tonsils. Pharyngeal. And these have another name. They're back in the back of the throat. Does anybody know what those are called? They're actually up towards the nasal cavity. So they're located right here. If this is your, that region. They have another name. You have swollen, I don't know why they're named this either. These are called the adenoids. Adenoids. And then we also have lingual tonsils. So what does lingual mean? Tongue. So this is the back of your tongue. So if you stick out your tongue really far, and sometimes when you're sick, your tongue gets like sore, and it gets these sore bumps on it, right? Way in the back. That is the lingual tonsil. And so here they show it way back in the back of the tongue area. And sometimes that also gets white when it's infected as well. So these are all first line of defense for protecting us against infection. When you look at the tonsils, they are very interesting, specifically the palatine tonsil. So if we look at the histology of it, they are actually designed to capture microbes. So they have structures which are called crypts. So if we look at the tonsillar crypt. So if you look at this little structure right there, and if you look on the surface, it looks like they have these little invaginations, and these are designed to capture microbes, right? And so they can be analyzed, those microorganisms can be analyzed, and the immune system, the lymphocytes, can then be signaled to start to undergo reproduction so that you can fight off an infection faster. So this is why once you have had a cold, that specific virus of that specific cold, you can be reinfected, but your body identifies it and fights it off before you even get sick. Sometimes it feels like you're getting sick. You're like, I just feel kind of sick today. My throat's a little bit swollen, but then the next day you're fine. That could have been what was going on, right? So your tonsils were trying to detect it, and your immune system was like, oh, and then all of a sudden you have the appropriate cells and antibodies that then fight it off, right? The problem with these tonsillar crypts is that they can also catch food, right, and debris. And so then you get what are called tonsil stones. So I'll put tonsil stones down here. So sometimes I get confused because my daughters have this when I'm looking to see if they have strep throat, which would be like white spots on their tonsils and on the back of their throat. I say, I think they have strep throat, but really what it is a stone. And sometimes those solidify and I have never had this happen, but they say that they cough and it causes the stones to just come up, right? So they cough up stones, tonsillar stones. And so if we look at a diagram of the tonsils, those are the swollen tonsils. This is a stone right there, right? So some people get these tonsil stones so bad that their tonsils are kind of swollen all the time. And so they feel sick all the time and they have sore throats all the time. And so then that is a sign that they probably should be removed. So when I was growing up, people were having their tonsils removed just all the time. Like it was like every kid just would go in and they would, I mean, it was just really routine until they realized how important it is to have tonsils. But sometimes it's important to take them out if they're chronically infected, specifically if they have tonsil stones. So if you look at the tonsils, when you remove them, it is amazing. They are huge, right? They're big. There's your to scale, right? They're a lot bigger than I thought they were. When my daughter had them out, I was like, what? Because he brought them in and showed them to me, you know, after he had them removed, right? So sometimes they burn them or they freeze them, they burn it, they cauterize it. And then what you have left is a throat that does not have any tonsils. So that's where your tonsils were. And look how big those holes are. I don't know if you guys can see this. Right? So that is what a scab looks like in a mucous membrane, right? So it's not hard. So it kind of looks like a scab, maybe a big scab after you've been in the bathtub for a while, right? It softens up, right? Right? So that's a scab. The really interesting thing I thought about when my daughter got her tonsils out is the doctor made a huge deal of her eating protein. He said that if she didn't eat protein, her tonsils, that it would take forever for that to, I mean, it's a big wound, right? And so all the protein that is necessary to rebuild those structures, to rebuild the tissue where those tonsils were, I mean, she doesn't regrow her tonsils, but just to rebuild that damaged tissue, it was he just made this big deal about how important protein was. And so she could not just eat, you know, ice cream. She was supposed to drink protein shakes, like she was supposed to supplement. So you have to, you know, the diet was important. You could just not stop eating, you know, even how painful it was. He said if she didn't eat and lost a lot of weight, it would just take forever for those wounds to heal. Also, they go in sometimes when they have the palatine tonsils. These would be the palatine because they're up next to the hard palate. They also remove the adenoids because those also tend to be infected. So we also have in our history the bubonic plague. And the bubonic plague is also related to the lymphatic system. It is actually caused by a bacteria. And the bubonic plague killed about a third of all Europeans, right, during the Middle Ages. And so what it does is the bacteria get into the lymph nodes, and then they cause the lymph nodes to swell so much that they turn black. And so you get these black swollen lymph nodes, and that is why it was referred to as the Black Death. And so the bubonic plague is related to lymph nodes specifically, but also the tonsils in that way. That was obviously before antibiotics, right? Okay. Then we have what is referred to as malt. So malt is mucus associated lymphatic tissue. That's what that stands for. And so this would be in the digestive system specifically and the respiratory system. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, there's been a lot of interest in the way the digestive system responds to microorganisms, because we have good microorganisms in our gut, and then we have, which are beneficial to our health actually, and even produce neurotransmitters and all kinds of vitamins and good things. And then we get bad bacteria in our digestive system, which could possibly lead to inflammatory diseases. But could also, there's even some evidence that, diseases that we once thought were part of other parts of the body start there, like even Alzheimer's or diabetes might start in the gut first and then spread to different parts of the body. So in the digestive system in particular, we have what is referred to as Peyer's patches. And this is in the small intestine, or actually in the large intestine too. So this is in the intestines. And so if you think about it, we have this bacteria that gets into our digestive tract, and we need to be able to identify it, and if it's bad, fight it off. We want to prevent bacteria from causing holes in our digestive tract. So we don't want the bacteria to digest its way into the wall and then cause what's sometimes referred to as leaky gut, because all kinds of nutrients and stuff can go right into the circulation, and microbes and other things can go right into circulation. So there needs to be a line of defense, right, in our digestive tract against bad microorganisms. And so that's why we have those Peyer's patches, which are shown in the wall right underneath the mucous membrane. Those Peyer's patches. Okay, we talked about lymphoma, so I think that's it for today. Okay, so on Wednesday, we're going to start talking more specifically about the immune system. So you can review your textbook chapters on the lymphatic system. And then you can go in and do the practice quiz, which is all set up. The practice quiz you can take, and it'll grade you initially, but I'm going to go in, and everybody who takes it gets the 5 points. So even if you miss all of them, I'm going to go back in and input the full 5 points just for practice, just to make sure that your Canvas site is working properly.